Kevin, born on August 6, 1963, in the Van Nuys area of California, had parents who divorced when he was still a baby. His mother, Shelley, with whom he lived, had to work long hours to make ends meet, and Kevin often spent his time alone. He filled his loneliness by making small explorations on the streets of Los Angeles. Kevin was a very curious child, but most importantly, his interest in technology and communication tools had already blossomed at that age. In his early adolescence, he began to dabble in amateur radio, even listening to police radio frequencies to try and figure out the world around him. Perhaps the foundations of the skills that would later be called social engineering were laid in these childhood curiosities, so much so that even at the age of 12, the famous idea for the first hack of his life had come to him. He noticed that on the city buses he took to and from school, the drivers would punch holes in the tickets as an act of approval. Seeing this, a plan immediately took shape in young Kevin's mind. If he could get one of those punching tools and find enough blank tickets, he could ride for free as much as he wanted in the city. His tactic for learning the secret of the punch was simple, and he did it in the most effective way. As an innocent and sweet child, he directly asked the bus driver where he could find that punch for a school project. The driver, unsuspecting, told him where it was sold. Kevin then used the same trick there and managed to steal a punch for himself. After observing the drivers for a while, he discovered that most of them would throw their unused blank transfer tickets into a garbage can near the bus garage at the end of the day. Then everything was ready. He took the blank tickets, filled them out, punched them, and thus had unlimited ticket access. At only 12, he had tricked the system and traveled all over Los Angeles for free for months until he was caught. But his war with the system was just beginning. As he entered his high school years, his urge to push the boundaries of technology grew. In high school, he continued his amateur radio hobby, while also trying to unravel the mysteries of telephone systems. Sometimes, just for fun, he would connect to the frequency of McDonald's drive-thru systems, and instead of the employee speaking and taking the order, he would speak himself, mocking the people trying to place an order. But he had no financial motive. He was just having fun. In high school, he befriended an older teenager who was involved with phone phreakers, and he learned from him some ways to make long-distance calls for free. So, he could now make inner-city calls for free. But he was about to attempt things that would even leave the friend who taught him these tricks speechless. He used the art of deceiving people, which is called social engineering, or perhaps was named thanks to him with natural talent. So much so that, at the age of 17, he could convince telephone company employees of almost anything over the phone or face-to-face. He knew internal company codes and procedures by heart, introducing himself as an insider. For example, on one occasion, he called the phone company's confidential numbers office, where, for instance, celebrities' numbers were kept, introduced himself as Jake Roberts, and said, "Our internal number has changed. Were you informed of our new number?" Thus getting his own number from the other party. Then, meeting with a mid-level manager at the same company, he asked, "We are updating the list of authorized personnel. Will your extension number remain on the list?" And with the answer, "Oh, my number is 354, leave it," he learned that person's name and extension number. Finally, using all the information he had, he placed a temporary call forwarding on that manager's phone. So, when the confidential numbers office called the manager to confirm the information, the call was directed to Kevin. Our teenage Kevin, acting as the manager, would either approve or reject the transaction. He had recorded the company's hold music on his tape recorder and would play the company's own theme music from his tape recorder when saying things like, "Just a minute, I'll put you on hold," taking things to an extreme level. He even used this method to access the numbers of famous actors and singers who were trying to keep their numbers secret at the time. But all this aside, Kevin's most fundamental superpower was not his technical skill, but his understanding of human psychology. Despite his young age, of course, the work wouldn't stop at just calling people on the phone. His serious introduction to computer technologies also coincided with this period. Also in those years, when he was 16 to 17, a friend gave him the phone number for a computer system at the University of Southern California Information Center. This central computer, nicknamed the Ark, Noah's Ark, was used by a large technology company, Digital Equipment Corporation (DEC), for remote software development. Our curiosity-driven Kevin gathered all his courage, connected to the Ark, that remote mainframe, with a landline phone, and managed to copy an important operating system software from DEC. To do this, he first called the company, pretended to be an employee whose information had been lost, and had a new account opened. Then he had high-level authority granted to this new account, all accomplished through his social engineering skills. He did all this in the 1970s, as a teenage youth, and only with a landline phone. All this was terrifying for his future. A teenager, not yet of legal age, had thus breached the network of a massive company. Although his jealous friends, who saw the incredible things he did, reported him, he got off with a gentle warning because he hadn't used any files or damaged any information. But this was his first capture. Whether he knew that what he was doing could have legal consequences is unknown. At that moment, what mattered to him was overcoming obstacles and cracking the system. However, the 1980s, when young Kevin would finally own a computer, were ahead of him. In the 1980s, Kevin Mitnick slowly began to make a name for himself in the underground world of hackers. Moreover, he wasn't trying to get rich from this. He was doing it mostly to satisfy his curiosity and overcome challenges. Sometimes he would copy software belonging to a company. Sometimes he would manipulate a telephone exchange to make free calls. And sometimes he would just enter a system and cover his tracks just to push the limits. While doing all this, his biggest weapon was his mastery of deceiving people rather than his high technical knowledge. In 1987, Kevin attempted to secretly infiltrate the offices of the Pacific Bell Telephone Company, which would later be known as AT&T, to steal technical documents. He took 2 friends with him and entered the company building's archive late at night. Before doing this, he had gone to the building during the day, introduced himself to the security guard as an employee, and even obtained permission, saying he would be showing his friends around the building in the evening. While no one was inside in the evening, the young men rummaging through the shelves obtained a list containing the passwords for accessing different centers of the telephone network. However, although they were not caught that night, the company was quite large and its owners were ambitious. Kevin Mitnick realized the severity of the situation, but this realization did him no good. FBI agents were at his house. In this first arrest, Kevin Mitnick was charged with stealing technical documents belonging to Pacific Bell. Because he was young, his case was heard in juvenile court, and he was sentenced to a few months in a reform school. Thus, Kevin managed to be recorded as one of the youngest people in the world convicted of a computer crime. But when he got out of reform school, he had no intention of settling down. Just for practice, he had infiltrated NORAD, the United States' highly critical military computer network. But that was it. He succeeded in infiltrating and then exiting. He hadn't taken any information from inside, nor did he have any financial motive again. Then, ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, emerged, and this time he tried to infiltrate the Pentagon via the internet. All this was a game for him, and unfortunately, he had no fear. But finally, in 1988, Kevin Mitnick officially stood before justice. A year earlier, in 1987, he had managed to infiltrate the networks of a computer company. And again, that friend had reported the situation to the FBI, betraying Kevin. He was only 25 and had spent a large part of his youth playing hacking games. He was being tried for various computer crimes, including all the incidents he was involved in the past. There was nothing to be done, and he accepted the charges against him. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. This time, he was truly behind bars. When he completed his sentence and was released in 1989, very strict rules were imposed on him. He was asked to stay away from computer and telephone systems, not to engage in any telecommunication fraud. In short, he was asked to give up his old habits, but he was Kevin, and he wasn't the type to listen much. Although he tried to behave himself for a while, even working as a receptionist, he only managed to stay away from computers for about 2 years. When 1992 arrived, with his supervised release period about to end, Mitnick couldn't resist again. He re-infiltrated the Pacific Bell Telephone Company system, the one that had caught him in the past, and this time set his sights on the voicemail system. By his own account, he did it simply out of curiosity and his desire for a challenge. However, being highly recognizable and with his methods already figured out, our guy got caught again. But this time, he had no intention of surrendering and chose to flee, which would add to his notoriety. Kevin disappeared. His name was on the most wanted lists of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies as the first computer hacker fugitive. Newspapers referred to him as the cyber world's #1 wanted man. He constantly changed locations, stayed in different cities with different identities, and hoped he wasn't leaving any digital traces. Everywhere he went, he made an effort to live like an ordinary citizen, trying not to attract attention. During this process, he also lost the considerable weight he had gained in previous years, exercised, and changed his appearance as much as possible. Thus, he was relatively unmatched with the old, heavier photos printed in the newspapers. Of course, while he was doing this, the FBI was not idle. They tried to tap his phones and use technology to the fullest to find his trail. But as you can understand, our guy was not an easy target. In 1993, sensing that FBI agents were preparing an operation to catch him in Los Angeles, Kevin, taking the attitude of in for a penny, in for a pound, infiltrated the Pacific Bell system again and began listening to the phones of the FBI agents assigned to his own file. This way, he could be informed of the agent's plans in advance. According to one legend, when the FBI came for a raid at one of Kevin's nomadic homes at the time, they found no one inside. Waiting for them was a box of donuts with "donut" for the FBI written on it. Kevin had managed to escape, practically mocking his pursuers. But their time was not spent only on the run. He was both running and continuing to earn the title of the greatest hacker in history. In this period of rapid development of the internet and mobile phone networks, he used both his old social engineering tricks and new technological exploits to roam the systems of giant companies. And giant was not an exaggeration. He had obtained the source code for Motorola's newest phone, the Ultralight. He did this again by introducing himself as an engineer from another office of the company, tricking the unfortunate employee. The other party naturally believed this deception and was persuaded to send the secret codes to him by mail. Kevin would later describe this venture as his most proud hack. He managed to infiltrate Novell, one of the biggest computer companies of the time, Fujitsu, and Sun Microsystems, which would later become the world's largest software company. He obtained valuable source codes, downloaded software, but most importantly, after accessing all this information, he destroyed it. That is, until that point, he had never sold any of it or used it for malicious purposes. Knowing that he could do it was enough for him. During his time as a fugitive, he could access the credit card information of more than 20,000 people for months. Instead of asking someone for a secret piece of information, he frequently used the tactic of stating incorrect information and asking them to correct it. On one occasion, he called the police headquarters, introduced himself as a traffic department official, and intentionally stated an incorrect code, saying, "Is your application code 36472? The police officer on the other end said, "No, our code is 62883, thus revealing the correct code and allowing him to access his new identity. For instance, he handled all his affairs coolly and politely. In 1994, he rented an apartment with a false identity in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was now on the other side of the country and hoped he had shaken off his pursuers. He lived quietly there for a while, maintaining a normal routine during the day to avoid attracting attention. Of course, at night, he would sit down at the computer, connect to remote servers, and continue to show off his skills. That was separate, but this time, he was acting more carefully and cautiously than ever before. One of his most ingenious findings was the use of cloned mobile phones. With special devices he possessed, he copied the identities of other people's mobile phones and made his calls using these fake identities. Thus, even if security units detected which number he was calling from, the number actually belonged to someone else. Consequently, catching him became even more difficult. But no matter how much he thought he had covered his tracks, it was impossible for him not to leave some digital clues behind. Especially the nicknames he used while surfing the internet, and the files he stole could be clues for someone who knew how to track him. As it turned out, Kevin's selection of a target that flattered his hacker ego was exactly what triggered a process that would lead to his end. This target was Tsutomu Shimomura, a famous computer security expert. Shimomura was a Japanese-American scientist and a well-known expert who consulted the government on computer security. Until that time, he was a simple man, minding his own business. But during the same period, Kevin was after software needed to perform more advanced hacks related to mobile phones, and according to rumors, Shimomura might have a copy of this special software that allowed remote control of mobile phones. Naturally, Both his need for the software and his limitless ambition came into play. For some reason, he wanted to teach the so-called security expert a lesson. On the night of December 25, 1994, with the help of an Israeli hacker friend, he carried out this infiltration operation and managed to take information from Shimomura's home computer. When he finished his work, he was absolutely delighted. He had defeated the man who had considered himself one of the world's best security experts for years, and he had humbled his ego. However, he would soon learn through bitter experience that this euphoria of victory would not last long. When Shimomura cut short his Christmas holiday and returned home, he was horrified by what he saw. His computer had been illegally accessed, and some files had been stolen. He immediately understood that the person who did this, both for their courage and their capability, had to be Kevin. But Shimomura, who had noticed Kevin trying to hack him about a year earlier and had taken precautions, had not neglected to install a monitoring tool that kept the system under recording. This was unfortunately a precaution Kevin had not accounted for. Shimomura examined the records and learned where the files had been transferred. Then he informed the FBI, and the whole team combined their efforts to prepare to pull the plug on Kevin. In January 1995, the FBI team, including Shimomura and several experts, began to monitor Kevin's online activities in real time, thanks to the precautions he had taken in the past. They even had all the chats Kevin had with his Israeli friend, his acquisition of credit card information, his infiltrations into major companies. The FBI realized once again what kind of man they were dealing with. The FBI team, including Shimomura, came to the complex where our guy lived on the night, connecting February 13th to February 14th. They waited around the complex for a day and used a moment when Kevin's signal was strongest to pinpoint his apartment. The teams were inside with the shouts of FBI, "Open up." But Kevin was nowhere to be found. No. Kevin was lying on the floor inside in fear. This was the tragic end of one of history's most legendary hackers, due to his own ambition. In the days that followed his arrest, as Kevin entered the courtroom, his eyes landed on someone. That person was Shimomura, looking at him with triumphant eyes and being the main reason for his capture. The prosecution tried to convince the judge that Kevin was incredibly dangerous. They even suggested that Kevin could launch nuclear missiles just by whistling into a phone. So unpredictable was he. They approached him with incredible caution, so much so that he was held in solitary confinement for a full 8 months before his trial. No one knew what might happen if he were to meet with other inmates or make a phone call. While he was inside, his colleagues outside, including the L0 PhD group, hacked the websites of major companies and wrote "Free Kevin" in large letters on their homepages. But it was all in vain. Although he became a hero and an icon in the hacker community outside, he was waiting for the conclusion of his case under incredibly severe conditions. Finally, in 1999, he was found guilty of 14 counts of electronic fraud and various computer crimes. The judge sentenced him to 46 months for his recent actions and an extra 22 months for violating the terms of his supervised release, totaling approximately 6 years in prison. Since he had already been in custody since '95, he was considered to have served a large part of his sentence by the time his trial was heard. Indeed, after completing 5 years in prison by February 2000, he became eligible for parole with the condition he could not use any technological device for nearly 3 years. In the post-parole period, Kevin would try to live a relatively quiet life. The years of long pursuit, imprisonment, and solitary confinement had left deep marks on him. The cyber rebel youth of yesteryear had become a man in his late 30s. In the future, the restrictions on him would be lifted, and he would establish his company with the computer gifted by Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, along with Wozniak's note, "Now hack legally," and would ironically begin to offer security software and intrusion prevention services to institutions. Until that time, he had not stolen a single cent through hacking. He emphasized that the real problem of the companies he had infiltrated in the past was not their systems, but their employees, saying, "A software bug is not a problem. It can be fixed. You cannot download a patch for human stupidity." He would serve the government and even collaborate with the FBI. He would also gain prominence as an author and write books. However, after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2022, he would endure his illness for about a year and a half and pass away in July 2023 at the age of 59. When he died, his wife was pregnant with their first child. He had succeeded in becoming the world's greatest hacker, but had closed his eyes to life without becoming a father. His adventure, which started with bus ticket punches and extended to the networks of the world's largest companies, had thus completely ended with his illness. That's all from me for this week. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please remember that I do all the work on this channel alone and can only accomplish these things with your likes and comments. I'm Moby. See you. As always, be well until the next video.